Anything that you have a question or something you'd like to share relating either to our class on Friday or the meditation or the reading that I know you've already been doing? Any questions that have come up or any sharing?
No, until now, I don't think so. The book was like a good introduction. It's a little bit, it's not very deep, but it's nice to get in the mood.
Yeah.
Something like that. Um, about last session. No, I think it until now it's all fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with a little practice. Bringing awareness to the breath, bringing awareness to the body. Feeling where the body is held in touch with the earth element. Allowing yourself to settle in to that feeling of being supported. At the same time that the body settles, relaxes, finding the upward impulse, the expression of the life force that reaches upward like a flower reaching for the sunlight. An expression of awareness, aliveness. So you're both relaxed and also aware. Naturally upright and conscious without effort. Letting the breath be open and loose. Letting the voice be available to arise with the exhalation, with a sigh, helping to dissipate any tension that may reveal itself. Letting the body be available for movement, also for dissipating any tension that may reveal itself. Allowing yourself to stretch or adjust your position and move. And from the place of connection with the earth element, you can allow awareness to extend into the field of aliveness, earth's intelligence, field of prana. Just as the body relaxes with the support, you can allow a sense of resting in this field of energy, of divine intelligence, a field of aliveness that nourishes and that helps us to release whatever there is to release, by renewing at the energetic level, replenishing, renewing. Reinvigorating. Giving permission for whatever needs to move within to have space, for sensations to arise as well as movements, for whatever is held down to be allowed to be gently brought into the field of awareness, to be digested, processed, released, transmuted. Arising as restfulness deepens and as a sense of empowerment consolidates, a sense of rootedness and strength, presence. The power of awareness, like a transmutational fire. Mm. Can bring awareness also to the space of the heart, if you like, bringing your hands to the chest to help to settle awareness here. Inviting the heart qualities to shine. And they can literally be experienced as shining, as brightness, as light, also as warmth. Inviting the heart qualities like courage, confidence, joy, gratitude, compassion, curiosity. We tend to associate the heart space with love. And you can think of these heart qualities as facets of love. Empowering this space of the heart with our gentle attention and our invitation for a flowering of these heart qualities. The energy of the smile, helping to nourish these heart qualities and potentiating this inner radiance, this light that can fill us from within, even to the point of overflowing, cleansing even the space around us, the field of mind, emotion, energy that surrounds us, permeating the field around us with light, pure aliveness, pure consciousness, pure potentiality. Even while sustaining the sense of rooted connection with earth, embodied awareness, also expansive, imbued with the heart qualities. And we can bring awareness also to moving from the space between the eyebrows into the head, into the center of the head, just letting the attention settle wherever it goes, resting in this place associated with the third eye, referred to as the third eye, and letting it just rest there. This place where energies come to balance, come into harmonious relationship, bringing about a deep sense of quiet presence. Fullness of presence. Allowing for this simplicity of presence to be also experienced as a joyfulness, a grace, a richness, a naturally arising divine communion, effortless. Flowing of grace. Letting the breath be open and loose and free. When you do engage the senses, letting yourself experience with the senses the same quality of presence and of grace. Allow yourself to be touched by grace through the senses. Allow yourself to experience life with the eyes open, with the senses engaged, whether you're in movement, in relationship to others, to activities, events, for it to all be an immersion in divine grace. So when you practice in silence, in stillness, there is an empowerment of this awareness of connection and of grace. But this grace is also available as a spontaneously arising quality of life, of experience. More and more unconditionally available. Feel free, and you feel ready to share even just a word. Feel free to express what's present for you in this moment.
And focus and calm.
Focus and calm. Thank you for sharing, André. Welcome, Anne. If you're able to share, feel free.
Hi. Hmm. What comes up is feeling very alive, in that sense that I feel it tingling through the whole body.
Mm. Very alive and tingling through the body. Nice. Okay. And do you bring any questions or anything you'd like to share? You're going to say something?
I think it was Paula, if I'm not mistaken. She asked to develop a little bit about the anti-tradition. Tantra is not a conformist.
Right, right.
I think
Okay.
about something like that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we can start going deeper into that theme of non-conformity, this quality of Tantra. There are many facets to this as well. So as we go through the program, we'll come back many times to each of the four core characteristics that we talked about on Friday. So one place where we could begin to speak of the non-conformity is when we contrast Tantra to the cultural context in which it arose. You can think of, first of all, the Indian spiritual culture, the Indian spiritual tradition, the religious context, the Vedic tradition that People today tend to use the term Hinduism when they speak of Indian, let's say the more pervasive Indian religion. There are reasons why the word Hinduism is not the most historically clear term for us to use. And the word Vedic would be in some ways a more helpful term for us to understand the culture. And we'll go into more detail about the history, the context, the background in which Tantra was birthed, and birthed many times, not just once. Tantra has been birthed whenever needed at different times. So there are lineages that give continuity to it, but there's also, you could say, new births of Tantra at times where it is needed, and at times where, let's say, a spiritually awakened being brings the renovation, the transformation of teachings that we could say have the tantric qualities to them. So there's this Vedic background, the Vedic culture that was pervading India. And Tantra became, in some ways, contrasted with it, with the Vedic culture. Tantra, or the word Tantrika, as referring to someone who was a practitioner of Tantra or the Tantric way, became contrasted with the word Vaidika, as the one who follows the way of the Vedas. Sometimes being seen as a kind of opposition to the Vedic way, and sometimes being seen as a new development in the Vedic teachings, a kind of new phase of revelation, an upgrade, an updating of the teachings for the present times. So even the word tantric, the word tantra, is associated with this opposition or contrasting to the background culture, where you could say that being considered an orthodox spiritual practitioner, you'd be Vaidika, and if you were unorthodox, you'd be Tantrika. The word Tantra has a multitude of contexts in which it's used. And so we can also start with some exploration of the meanings associated. I'm just going to check here. Someone might be wanting to connect. Yeah. Okay. The word Tantra, we should have understanding, as well as the 4 core characteristics that I shared on Friday, that give us some sense of where these many different lineages and approaches, where they converge into something that is really what we're focusing on here. The traditions and teachings that have those qualities of being focused on liberation as the objective. These traditions that have an honoring of the divine and its feminine qualities that is driven in some sense by compassion, the desire to be of service to others at the deepest level through our own spiritual awakening, our own spiritual liberation, for that itself to be a form of service, a form of becoming part of the current of liberation, the current of grace. And this aspect that we've just talked about as well, the non-conformity that's you could say a consistent aspect of Tantra is the willingness to question, is this really true? Is this reality in the deepest sense? And you could say, is this true now? Is this, you could say, relevant here, now? And that's why also, even where Tantra is seen as a continuation of the Vedic stream, rather than a total opposition or rejection of it, but the question is, what's meaningful, real, and effective now? But people in the current state of consciousness that they live in, what are the practices and teachings that will be meaningful and effective now? So non-conformity, we have to see it not just, as I said on Friday, not just as an opposition, as a rebelliousness, like an automatic countering of what's there, but a questioning of it, a looking deeply into it. So it's a non-dogmatic look at the world and at ourselves. That's one way that we can think of this non-conformity. It's a resistance to dogmatism, a resistance to entering into blind habit. It's a way of staying awake, lucid. Not falling into unconscious patterns, whether that be our own lifestyles patterns that we've built up personally, or our society, or even our religious community, let's say, spiritual community. A willingness to look at it with fresh eyes, with a sense of innocent curiosity, to see what is the deepest, most potent way to experience or express the truth in its aliveness now. And so there is also within this spirit of non-conformity, an impulse that allows for a refreshing of the teachings, a renovation, and like I said, a kind of an updating of them, making the teachings, the practices meaningful, suitable for the individual and for the time in which they are being experienced. This non-dogmatic way of experiencing religion, spirituality, allowed for the so-called, let's say, Hindu or Vedic Tantric practitioners. Now, I know that from what I've just said, there's a kind of contradiction in saying Vedic Tantric practitioner. But what I mean is those that saw themselves as part of a stream of continuity from the Vedic into the Tantric. So those that were what would commonly be referred to as, let's say, Hindu Tantrics. So in India, the Hindu Tantrics found themselves able to relate to the Buddhist Tantrics, even though they were supposedly in different religious communities, adhering to different religious convictions. And yet they could relate to each other as brothers and sisters within a kind of common community, because they shared the clarity that what they were seeking was liberation. And it wasn't the forms in which the tradition was taught that was the most important thing, but the spirit of the tradition. And the spirit was ever renewing itself. And so this allowed for a togetherness within the tantric communities. Even the Islamic mystics that became very concentrated in the area of Kashmir, which was also a place of development of Tantra. It is said that the Tantrics and the Sufis would share poetry and dance together. So again, there, this spirit of shared purpose and a common spirit animating their path. And you find some commonalities also within the Sufi poetry and the Tantric poetry, where symbolism that describes, let's say, forbidden practices, forbidden substances, were referred to as ritual substances, as substances of sacred offerings. And so there was a direct inversion. Things that were normally considered to be necessary to avoid because they were impure in some sense, or dangerous in some sense, became actually used as sacraments, as substances of offering to the divine. This includes bodily substances, sexual fluids, also intoxicants, foods that were forbidden. So all these things that were, let's say, problematic within the culture, feared or rejected, became celebrated. Part of this process of transition from seeing things as unworthy of being touched or engaged with, and these things, these activities or substances becoming used as sacraments, part of it comes from that spirit of questioning, of saying, if everything is divine, if everything is let's say, the body and substance of the divine, then how can anything be unworthy? How can anything create a stain on our essence if the divine is actually what permeates all of existence? And so it was a challenge to our own taboos, a challenge to our own programming, where we split what is sacred from what is not sacred in our own thinking, in our own beliefs, in our own conceptions, in our way of relating to our bodies and to the world. A direct challenge to those assumptions, that division, by bringing what was rejected into the realm of the sacred in the most direct way. And there are aspects of Tantra that we can make sense of by looking at how they can be helpful today. We can make sense of their utility by contrasting, let's say, contemporary attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, contemporary taboos, and looking at how Tantra is meaningful today in that context of our current challenges, let's say. And you can understand Tantra in a sometimes a bit different way by looking at how it was responding in different historical periods to the situation of the times and of that particular cultural, religious environment. So some aspects of it are meaningful in the historical context as a direct response to that environment and those beliefs and those taboos. Which is why when I'm describing here the core characteristics of Tantra, rather than picking a specific way in which it was non-Vedic or anti-Vedic or counteracting a specific taboo, I'm giving you that general principle of non-conformity, because how the tradition doesn't conform depends on where and when. So I also want to invite you to do an exercise of taking note. What are your current taboos? Where in your life, or what do you see around you culturally, even if you don't really identify with the taboos, but what do you see culturally as the taboos of today? The ways in which we culturally create a split between the sacred and the profane, the pure and the impure. So we can have more and more clarity about what conditioning we've been born into and educated into in modern times, in our lifetimes. What is this cultural environment of splitting between the pure, the impure, the sacred, the profane? What is allowed and what is not? What is considered polite or impolite? All these splits, you know? So some of these you might consider to be splits that exist in you, divisions that exist in you, and some of them you might feel that they're not really meaningful in you, in your life personally, that they're not personal challenges or personal taboos, but notice also the ones that are cultural. And I'd love for you to add to this, you know, observe and add to this, at least between now and Friday. But you may notice things and just keep noticing and adding to that. I think that's a rich source of exploration that will be meaningful in this over the course of this program. And the more you look, the more you'll perhaps notice the complexity of this as well, because perhaps even if just a few decades ago, there was more homogeneity within the culture or the cultures. And in some sense now with the ease of communication, internet, the ease of travel, in some sense, the different nations and cultures of different nationalities have merged into a kind of homogeneity. You could say now that there is modern culture in this sort of widespread sense. But there's also, while there's been an assimilation, you could say a globalization of culture, there's also, as a result of, I would say, especially the algorithms of social media, there is tremendous polarization within subcultures. So there are groups of attitudes, people that share an attitude, a belief, could be a political perspective or a spiritual perspective. But the way we are fed information by YouTube, for example, where if you sign into a YouTube account, you'll be getting more of what you've already looked at, what you've liked, what you've spent time engaging with. You'll get more of it and more of it and more of it. And you'll get not only more quantity, but you'll also be, through the algorithm, given content that is likely to be at some level controversial, so it will create a reaction, so it will engage you. So it's not just neutral content, but it's content that people have commented a lot on, engaged with, because it's shaken them up, perhaps. It's upset them, right? So this is also something that social media is programmed to, is to feed us content that ends up being in some ways divisive, distinguishing your perspective from the opposite perspective, which creates micro communities of people that see radically differently. So there's these two different phenomena, right? The sort of globalization of culture, but also the radicalization at subcultural of subcultures, where it's difficult for people to understand each other because they're being given consistently a specific point of view that is often the opposite of another point of view that someone else is being fed consistently. So the taboos, the things that you're supposed to say, supposed to believe, can actually be radically different within these different groups. So this is why it can be an ongoing exploration and a kind of a never-ending discovery. One way to apply this principle of non-conformity in your own life, to access the power of this you could say it's a quality, right? A sort of a grounded curiosity, because in a way, non-conformity, like I said, it's important to distinguish it from just a knee-jerk response that where we just are in opposition, always in opposition, always in opposition. It's not that, because that would be a blind response of opposition. So the quality that I'm speaking of here in the Tantric tradition is not a blind opposition, but an intelligent opposition when necessary. So it begins really with a questioning, with an observation, with a grounded observation and feeling into what is true. And out of that organic, intelligent sensing, truth can be seen more deeply, rather than assuming it's there because that's what people say, that's what people do, that's what for generations they've believed, or it's what everyone does or believes. Being able to come to clarity for yourself. And it can be very powerful, quite uncomfortable also, but powerful, to ask ourselves, what attitudes have we become comfortable with? Comfortable as being let's say, obviously true. And yet there are belief, a conviction based on accumulation of information, layered upon more information, which gives us the feeling of truth, of objectivity, of unquestionable fact. And yet, if we ask ourselves, does anyone not see it that way? Does anyone not see the things the way we do? Anyone at all? And then ask ourselves, how is that? Is it because they're stupid? Because they're crazy? Or is it because we've both been building upon our beliefs layer upon layer to the point where we don't even have space to question ourselves? So why I feel this is important, I want to, keep giving context. A lot of what we will do is to come back to context. Tantra to me is liberating for the individual, but it also has a cultural quality of liberation. It has, let's say, an overflow from the individual process into the culture. And to some extent, that's always true. We're not separate, right? Our process of awakening, of personal development is always going to influence the space around us, whether it's because we smile when we interact rather than being closed when we interact. That can change someone's day. Just one smile when they're having a terrible day and when no one ever pays any attention, and suddenly someone is warm to them. That can be significant, tremendously significant for someone who's really having a hard time. So even in the smallest ways, our journey will impact others. But Tantra as a way of re-envisioning reality, re-envisioning society, re-envisioning who we are, how we fit into society, what our power of influence is in society. All of this can start to create shifts on many other levels. And so Tantra is in some ways a kind of revolutionary force, not just for personal transformation. It has a kind of an inevitably revolutionary effect in where it grows. Any sharing, any reflections on what we've talked about today relating to non-conformity and these aspects of it that we've talked about? If each day we notice just one thing that is uncomfortable to us, but which we could challenge ourselves with. I can give you a series of examples. Like, imagine there's some kind of music that normally you just feel like that's not my type of music. It's not what I like. And there may be all sorts of beliefs or assumptions about that type of music that we have that we don't normally think about. We just have a clear distinction. I like this, I don't like that. And we may be aware or not about the details of why. But that would be one area in which we might explore. Well, what is it like to listen to this form of music that normally I reject, and to see if I can find a neutrality, a curiosity, an innocence with which I can experience it without my usual pre-existing rejection. What's it like to just engage with it as it is, as if I have no opinion about it, as if I have no experience with it, as if I'm really purely listening and experiencing it as if for the first time. So we can do that with music or other forms of art. One way in which I practice continuing with that for a moment, when it's not something that we have a really strong feeling about, like it's something we fear, because I mentioned before the context of Tantra developing as a challenging of taboos, challenging of rules. Like when it's about music we don't like much, it's not a big deal in terms of what we're facing in our subconscious. It's a gentle practice, right? Of facing our subconscious, our beliefs, but without going, let's say, aggressively against our fear. But it's a way of practicing our ability to meet our subconscious, practicing the ability to meet our subconscious, strengthening our ability to actually engage with our fear. So with little things we can do this, but it builds up our ability to actually engage with our fear and overcome what would normally be an unconscious fear. So an example that I sometimes practice is a bee comes in through the window. I'll try to actually pick it up in my hand. Now, I know a bee can sting me. I know a bee won't kill me because I'm not allergic to bee stings, but it's unpleasant to be stung by a bee. But I also know that a bee doesn't want to sting. It's not its first choice because that's the death of the bee. So if I can stay calm and I can engage with the bee in a way that isn't aggressive, I can establish a kind of harmony with the bee. I can let it come into my hand, I can take it to the window and it can go out. And this process is a way of me engaging with the discomfort, the let's say the instinctive fear of being stung, the instinctive fear of pain, and to self-regulate as I experience the excitement, the discomfort, to just relax into it, to relax into it, to relax it, to breathe, to find myself relaxed as I do something that awakens some degree of discomfort and fear. The same for picking up some kind of a bug that maybe we know it doesn't even sting, but there's something in us that rejects it as, in some sense, like a nasty bug. You know, and to kind of go and again to just kind of meet it and to pick it up. Or, you know, I'm not saying this is how you should practice. Maybe not pick it up. Maybe just be close to it. You know, maybe just be close to it and to just breathe and relax. If there's something that you feel it impacts your nervous system when you see it, when it's in your space. You know, to just notice how your nervous system is impacted, how your breath is impacted, and to consciously self-regulate, to use these challenges as opportunities for observing your responses. You know, the programmed responses. In some ways, all our programmed responses are like little bombs that go off when a trigger occurs. And so we're learning to diffuse, I don't know if you know that expression, diffuse the bomb. And all of this is giving us a way to relate to our subconscious more and more intentionally, more and more freely access aspects of ourselves that would normally split from conscious to subconscious, conscious to unconscious. So we are gaining consciousness through this practice. So I'd love to hear from you if you put this into practice. You can share a bit, take notes. Take notes, take pictures. Share your experiences. Any questions or any reflections before we complete for today?
No, no questions here.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's one thing to say before we complete is just that, of course, the popular view of Tantra is exclusively about the field of sexuality. And so where people tend to apply this in modern Tantra is to ask themselves, how am I sexually stuck? How am I closed in my intimacy? How am I programmed to have certain beliefs about intimacy and relationship? And what some people will do within the modern tantric movement is to counteract their programming around intimacy. And sometimes what you find, though, is that this is done in a kind of forced way, kind of peer pressure, intentionally or not. But what often can happen is that people find themselves out of a kind of peer pressure, feeling like I'm supposed to now go from monogamy into being open to polygamy. I'm supposed to go from being in a committed relationship to being open to relating with anyone, because that's freedom, right? So there's an inversion of values from what is comfortable to you to what is challenging as supposedly a way to experience more freedom. But to the extent that it's forced, to the extent that it's unconsciously forced, it can actually be a disruptive, disintegrative experience rather than a strengthening one. So just bearing that in mind, that there is a gentleness that I'm inviting you to approach this process of non-conformity as an exploration with curiosity. Bringing joy into it, bringing enjoyment into it. Okay. Apologies for going over time a little bit. I'm going to try to always start on time and finish on the hour in case you have other commitments. Okay. Anne, you're muted.
Sorry, exactly. Just one thing, when you said, or when we can think about where we created the split between the sacred and the profane, or the pure and the impure. This is what you mean. This has to do with what you just talked about with the practices. I don't really get it right now. You know what you said with the back, for example.
Yeah. Well, at a subconscious level, we may feel like a bug is yucky. Right? I'm using intentionally like kids' language. You know, it might be something that goes all the way back to our childhood. Like, ugh, yuck. You know? So we've been programmed to think like there's something bad or wrong with that thing. And that programming can just be so old, so like be part of us since as long as we remember, you know? So to challenge that assumption and that unconscious response by creating a new response, a new relationship, or an exploration where before there was no way of exploring because it was just a barrier. Like, this is something I want away from me, you know? What's hidden behind that split, what's hidden behind that rejection is the subconscious, the mechanics, let's say, the processes that create a split between the conscious and the subconscious.
Mm.
You know, every time there is an unconscious rejection, a habitual rejection, there is a split between conscious and unconscious that's present there. So every time we notice our instinctive responses or programmed responses, and we listen more carefully to them, it doesn't mean you have to literally go against it. It's like, I'm not obviously saying to you that when you stand in front of a road with cars going past and it feels dangerous, that you should therefore walk into the road. There's context in which these explorations can be done safely, and there's a context in which it makes no sense to go against our programming, because that programming is not just unconscious programming, it's intelligent. It's the intelligent way to respond to the situation.
Mm.
So it's a matter of bringing more and more discernment. What's true and real about how I'm responding, and what's just a programmed response?
So meaning, because all of this is under the subject of non-conformity, right? Like, so that we sort of find out what is real, what is true to us with non-conformity, sort of like that. Or?
Yes, but I would suggest not trying to make a lot of sense of it. And even in terms of, yes, it has to do with non-conformity, it does, but you could say it also has to do with compassion.
Mm.
It has to do with liberation. It has to do with honoring of the divine as in its feminine aspect. It actually has to do with all these things in some ways. You know, Shakti is the whole universe, everything, not just the parts we like, not just the parts that we socially celebrate or have put into that category of good and comfortable and pleasant. It's not just that that's Shakti. The whole universe in all its aspects is Shakti. So when we heal our relationship to things that have become rejected, we are bringing back into, we're allowing the possibility of bringing back into our experience of the sacred what has been rejected. And not just that specific bug or that specific song, but the ability to do it in general, the ability to reintegrate what has been pushed into the subconscious, aspects of ourselves also that we have judged, that we are afraid to experience. We are practicing the ability to integrate, to embrace, to be no longer fragmented in our experience of life. So it's a principle that we're practicing, you know, of reintegration and discernment, consciousness, rather than being an unconscious reactivity.
Mm.
There are multiple things really that are taking place through this. Super simple, kind of childish exercise, and yet lots of different things are touched on.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for asking, and I'm happy for always, you know, whatever doubts you have, do bring them in, because it's always going to help us to go deeper into clarity. Yeah.
Thank you.
you might like to, if there are images that are of religious iconography that you feel uncomfortable with. For some people, seeing Kali is like horrible, right? Kali, Durga. For some people, seeing an image of Jesus is horrible, right? It depends on what your background is and what beliefs you've acquired and what classifications you've created in your mind of what's beautiful and what's good and what's right. And so that's one way also to practice this exercise of regaining curiosity, regaining a kind of innocent relationship to things. And you can engage with it as a partly mental process, partly in the sense that you can ask yourself, well, what is it that upsets me about this? What is it that disturbs me? That's partly a mental process. But more importantly than getting a mental answer is to actually experience your physiological response. Notice whatever tension there is, allow yourself to relax as you engage with whatever it is that's moving you, that's triggering you. And if I remember next time, I'll share an experience I had challenging my fear of heights. Quite a funny story that I probably haven't shared with you before about that.
Okay.
Big hug. Lots of love.
Thank you. See you
Ciao.
Friday.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Love to everyone who's watching the recording.